Welcome, everybody. And I just lost Simon's video. Welcome to another webinar with Darlene and Digital Photo Mentor. As you guys are streaming in, you can see my guest is with me. Simon, welcome. He's all on the other side of the planet in Korea. So this is why we are doing this at this time of day, because it's 7 p.m. for me. And what time is it for you, Simon?
It is 10 a.m. here.
So if you could advance the slide for me to the next one, as you are all entering the webinar, please tell us in the chat where you're from. We can see your name and what you're signed in as. And tell Simon what lens tips you would like to learn today. What are you interested in learning? Okay. If you have a technical issue, Rob is going to help you. He's my husband. He's in the chat. He's going to help you with that in the chat. So a couple of house cleaning tips in terms of learning this system. There's a little chat bubble over on the bottom right. It's a little blue bubble. So you can message us there in terms of say hi. I'd love to know what time it is where you are. Lots of Australians. So this schedule is great for Australia, not so much for Europeans. So if any of our Europeans are with us, kudos to you for staying up late. If you have a question for Simon that pertains to the actual content in the webinar, please put it in the questions area below. So to get there, what you have to do is just scroll your browser up like you're browsing a web page, and there's actually stuff down below where we're talking. So if you scroll the screen up a little bit, you'll see questions, polls, and offers. Okay, so if you haven't already done so, go ahead and fill in the poll and tell us if you've tried Lensball photography before or not. Give us the most appropriate answer there. And if you have a question, you can see that people are asking things like how to get the best use with Lensball, how to get a circular effect. So things like that. So if you have a question like that, put it in the question area, not in the chat, okay? Because if it's in the chat, there's lots of people joining in live here. We're already got 300 plus. So as we continue, more people are going to join, and I'm going to not see your questions if they're in the chat. Okay, so make sure that your questions are in the question area, your chat's in the chat area if you just want to say hey, and we'll be looking at all of those later as well, but I don't want to miss your questions. All right, so let's go to the next slide. Okay, I already covered that one. Okay, so if you have a question, put it below. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Simon and take it away.
Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to my webinar. I'm really pleased that so many of you have chosen to join this subject today. I personally think that lensball photography is a fascinating area of photography to get into. So let's carry on. So lensball photography has become my signature style of photography. It's something which I've been practicing for well over 10 years now. So I predate the Lensball photography craze by quite a few years. Back when I started to take photographs with the Lensball, it was still just called a crystal ball. I started my journey in Lensball photography in Asia, where I live now. As Darlene's mentioned, I live in South Korea, and bought my first crystal ball in a local market in Shanghai in China. So the Lensball or crystal ball, as I mentioned, quickly became a part of my style of photography. I quickly got noticed by some national newspapers in my home country, the UK. They saw my photographs on the photo sharing website Flickr at the time, where it got onto the front page of their Explore algorithm, and were interested in running an article on it. So I agreed to that, and you can see the article on the right-hand side. That newspaper is the London Metro, which has got a high readership in the UK. Beyond that, I've also had quite a few tear sheets in other magazines. On the left-hand side, you'll see Thai Airways in-flight magazine, Sawadi. I run quite a few articles in some of the regional carriers in this part of the world. And in the middle, not related to Lensball photography, but I thought I'd like to mention that I have a front cover for National Geographic Traveller. Okay, so You're going to see a series of 6 photographs in a moment. I want you to look at those photographs and to think about the photographs you see. So one of the useful exercises for any photographer is to look at other people's work and to see if you can reverse engineer the photograph so that you can find out how you might take that photograph yourself. Then you can obviously use that style of photography with your own interpretation and get some nice results. Equally, I want you to think about which photographs you like the most in terms of style. Again, that's a useful exercise to look at other people's work to see what kind of photographs that you like yourself, which you can then take into your own photography. Obviously, you'll probably see several different styles of photograph, and you'll merge those all in together, and that will eventually form your style of photograph, be that Lensball photography or any other style.
So I've created a poll for you guys, another poll. So look at all 6 images first, and he'll show them to you twice, and then make your vote as to which one appeals to you the most after we talk about the 6.
Okay, so these are the first 3 photographs that you can see. The photographs all have obviously Lensball photographs, and they show some of the different styles of photographs you can use. On the right-hand side, you'll see 3 Lensballs. The middle photograph, interestingly, is not actually officially a Lensball because it's larger than the size those companies sell at. And in the middle, you'll see a photograph that shows a ball that appears to float in midair. It sort of perfectly aligns with the background horizon line. And on the left-hand side, you'll see another photograph. I like to try and use complementary elements in my foreground that complement the image that appears in the background of the Lensball itself. Okay, and here are the next 3 slides. In these photographs, so we have a photograph from Myanmar, another one from India, and finally cherry blossom season in South Korea.
People are voting.
Okay, so I'm going to give you a few moments to look at this slide, then just cycle back to the next slide one more time. You can see those photographs.
I'm attracted to the color of the middle one, that's number 2, because of the intense red and green, and like you said, the opposing complementary colors. Please put your votes, guys, in the poll, not in the chat, because we can't tabulate what's happening in the chat. There's a poll down below where you can enter your votes, okay? So put your votes down there. I see there's lots of numbers coming in through the chat there. So
yeah, I can see a lot of numbers flickering through the chat, which is great because I love to see everybody's engaged in what they're seeing.
They're awake. Yeah. Let's see the last 3 again.
Let's see those last 3 again.
There we go.
Okay, I'm going to just slide down from the my slideshow so I can see some of the results in the poll. So number 2 is coming out quite high at the moment.
Yeah, that's
so
the one with the red and the green.
That's the red and the green. It's a good choice. It's definitely one of my favorite photographs from the series.
And I think the one with the Taj was the one Rob liked yesterday, and that one's coming out quite strongly as well.
Number 2 and number 5. So I wonder if that's a kind of almost. I deliberately put the 2
psychological in the
middle, right? Yeah.
We're tricking you guys. It's a trick. It's a trick. Yeah. So make note for yourselves which ones appeal to you in terms of style or color, and as we go through, and just sort of make a mental note.
Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. So this webinar is obviously, I want to engage everybody in Lensball photography who's never actually approached this before, but there's also a large number of you who've obviously picked up a Lensball, and you may well relate to some of the following. So obviously, you know, you have your new Lensball, and with any style of photography, it's a learning curve. In some ways, it's a little intimidating, and I'll tell you the truth. After I bought my Lensball in Shanghai, I was traveling with a friend there who's a fellow photographer, and I actually only took one photograph with the Lensball for the rest of that trip. I guess I was self-conscious about using the Lensball in the early days in front of another photographer. I think I only took photographs in Xi'an of the Terracotta Army inside the Lensball, and to be honest, it's not my favorite photograph by the long stretch anymore. But it wasn't until I got back home to South Korea and I could just experiment with it on my own. And I learned very quickly at that point. But it can be intimidating to begin with, to think about what works and what doesn't. So hopefully I can help you with that today.
So I'd like to just add that don't beat yourself up that if you're trying this as a new thing and you're like, okay, well, I think I'm an intermediate photographer, I should be able to figure this out on my own. I have been a pro for 30 years and I could not figure out shooting infrared on my new infrared camera the first time. Somebody had to help me. So there's no harm, there's no shame in needing a little help.
So yeah, I agree with Darlene, and especially about the infrared photography. It's a fun technique to try out, but there's also a learning curve to that too. Obviously, you know, I want you to realize your potential. Maybe you've only used this a couple of times. As I mentioned, like the first time I took a photograph with this, the results were not that pretty. Maybe even the second and third time, when I really look back at the very first photographs I took with it, I had this idea of some of the things that I thought would work with it. When it came to actually photographing in practice, I realized that the way that the ball distorts the image makes my idea that it was far too small within the ball. So I had to sort of think, okay, so that's how that works. Okay, if that happens, that place will work. So I had a few sort of, I guess, sort of light bulb moments in my mind, and probably by the third or fourth time, I took it up to a local beauty spot. It's a landscape viewpoint with a large area. In fact, you'll see a photograph from there later on. It was perfect for the Lensball. So it captured this huge, wide fisheye-like scene within the ball. That photograph was picked up. It was one of the ones that the national newspaper in the UK first saw. Okay, so I think we talked about some of you don't have a Lensball yet, and some of you do. If you don't have a Lensball yet and you're looking to maybe buy one, I've written an article on Darlene's fantastic blog, and you can read about it here. That article goes to talk about the different sizes that you can buy, and gives you some information about where you might like to buy those.
Rob has just popped a link for that in the chat for everybody.
Rob looks like he's just added that to the chat. Owen, the wine glass is great. Fill it with water and you'll see some refraction inside the wine glass. That's actually the first kind of refraction style photograph I ever saw. It wasn't a Lensball, it was a wine glass filled with liquid. Probably some nice white wine. Okay, so we're not talking about wine glasses. Let's talk about Lensballs. John, we're getting to the teaching. I'm going to start teaching right about now. Okay, so, and sorry for procrastinating on that. Okay, I would.
So okay. Camera equipment.
Okay, so the camera equipment. So basically, obviously, this technique requires a Lensball and a camera which you can take a photograph with that Lensball. That's the basic equipment. You're not going to be doing very much Lensball photography without that. Beyond that, I want to talk a little bit about some of the other equipment that you could possibly have, which will help enhance your photographs. I like to get quite close into the Lensball when I take photographs, but it's not everybody's style. I've seen some photographers who like to have a much wider scene in most of their photographs, and the Lensball is proportionally smaller in the photograph. I like to get quite close because I want the ball to be the main subject and the subject in the ball to be dominant in the photograph. And to do that, using a macro lens or a telephoto lens that has a macro-like capability at the longer focal distances is an optimal lens to use. As I just mentioned, some photographers like to use wide angles, and I also like to use wide angles too. I think it adds variety to your compositions and gives you something different for your photographs. Okay, so a crystal ball holder is a useful item to have. Obviously, the spherical nature of the ball means that it rolls around a lot, especially if you have a flat surface. You may find a location that you want to take that photograph from. It's all lined up with your background and your subject in the ball. However, your problem is that the ball doesn't stay still, and you can't take that photograph without the ball staying still, of course. So a lens ball holder will help you with that. Failing that, something like a bottle top that's turned up on its side, you can place it on that, or even sometimes I used to use a lens cap, one of the screw-on lens cap.
Oh, the back lens cap.
Back of the lens cap. Turn that up on its side, and that will work as a crystal ball holder in a pinch. I don't usually, when I have that, I don't usually like to include the lens ball, the holder in the composition itself. I tend to cut at the bottom of the ball so that you can't see that element. I try to be minimalist in the style of photographs I take.
Somebody is asking in the chat, what is a lens ball holder?
Okay.
I believe it's just like a little stand that comes with some of them, right? It's
exactly that. So often that's a wooden stand that's kind of circular at the bottom, has a little indent divot so that the ball sits nicely on the stand without rolling away. You'll also see some of these in glass, and I think aesthetically, especially for photography, having a glass lens ball holder is better.
Somebody's suggesting a circular keychain, like those split ones that you could sit your ball on at the bottom. That's a great idea, guys.
That's a great idea. And to further that, if you want to have something even less noticeable in your frame, I found using the iPhone SIM card, the iPhone SIM card opener.
Oh, the little thing that you poke.
The little thing, yeah. It's very flat, and yet it has this sort of kind of circular oblong shaped part in the middle that you can sit the ball on. If you have a very flat surface and it's genuinely flat, but the ball is moving around, if you use that the iPhone SIM card remover and put that on the flat surface, the ball will sit flat on that.
Some other great ideas in the chat. People are saying a bottle cap, a washer, like from like a plumbing, and somebody else says a golf tee. So if it's in soft ground, just stick the golf tee in. Yeah, some good ideas.
Perfect. Okay, so
I was just going to mention regarding the macro lens. If you don't have a macro lens, anything that allows you to get closer focusing, so that could be a close-up filter or even extension tubes, that'll do the trick as well.
Yeah, I agree. That's the end aim is, as Darlene said, something that allows you to get closer to the ball will also work.
Or somebody says a salt packet from a restaurant, like a little bean bag on the bottom. That's great. You guys are creative. Yeah. Awesome.
Nice. Okay, so I also like to have I used to use an old sock. These days, since Lensball has become a bigger part of crystal ball photography, they tend to come with a sleeve for storage. But back in the day before that, I would use an old black sock to store the ball. That would prevent the ball from scratching in transit, and would also stop the ball from potentially being a fire hazard within my bag. If the sun shines on the ball, it magnifies the rays, and you end up with a nice big little burn mark circle from where that sun ray has focused in on inside your camera bag, which isn't ideal.
And you don't want to store it in your front window in your house.
No, you really, really,
cover.
really don't want to store it in your front window. I've read at least 2, maybe 3 articles in some newspapers where somebody's had a house fire from one of these things.
Yeah, be careful.
So seriously, don't do that.
Yeah, be careful.
Okay, so I think a tripod is a great thing to have. I think that's a general rule, not just for Lensball photography, but for any photography. Having a tripod is a great item. In terms of Lensball photography, that's essentially for anything which is kind of blue hour or into the evening where you're taking photographs. It's a great time to take photographs with Lensballs because you get that nice lights in the background that produce bokeh, but in order to be able to take advantage of that, then having a long exposure and using a tripod is often necessary. I think we've covered a lot of this in the chat already. Other people's suggestion, things like twigs, pebbles, what was it, the restaurant bag thing. Basically, other items that you could use to keep the ball steady in a location where you want to take the photograph from, but the ball is moving around a little bit and you can't keep it still. So these items here, like a twig behind the ball or some pebbles placed strategically behind the ball to stop it moving, can be ideal. Okay, so a lot of people will ask me about what camera settings will I use when I take a photograph with the Lensball. Now, these are the base settings. I wouldn't say that they are hard and fast by any means. Depending on your situation, you might use radically different settings to these. These are the base settings that I might use for the majority of my photographs, where I have a composition that the ball is dominant in my frame. It's like a classic composition that I used for many of my photographs, but not all of my photographs. So with that caveat in place, let's talk about these settings and why I use them. So I use a lens, and we've mentioned already a medium telephoto lens with, if possible, macro-like capabilities. That's in order to be able to get close into the ball. It also has the advantage that you will almost always naturally get a blurred out background by using one of these kind of lenses. It will focus in on the subject and the ball, and your background area is usually far enough back for that to be blurred out so that it doesn't become a distracting element in your photograph. So how do I achieve focus? So usually it's a good idea to focus on the very middle area of the ball. That's the area that will have the sweet spot focus within the ball. If you try and focus on the outside area, you'll get distortion. So don't do that. Focus on the middle area of the ball. Use your camera's spot focus function. So you selectively move the focus on your camera viewer to be in the middle of the Lensball, and then focus on there using your camera's autofocus. Obviously, you could try to use manual focus, but that's a situation again where I think I'd suggest using a tripod so that your camera isn't moving around if you want to use any kind of manual focus. The shooting mode, this is probably up to your discretion. I would tend to suggest using aperture priority because I feel like one of the important settings for Lensball photography is to be able to control the aperture, which in turn controls the blurred out nature of the background. So you can use aperture priority, but if you wish, obviously, use manual priority if that's your thing. Is an aperture of f3.2. Now, aperture is an interesting subject for this because there is a balancing act here. It obviously will depend on whether you actually want to blur out the background. You may choose artistically that the background is kind of interesting and complements the ball, and you want to include that as a greater part of your scene, in which case using an aperture of 3.2 might not be appropriate. But for the majority of photographs, I think it's better to have that background as an accent that's mainly blurred out so that it doesn't distract from the main subject, which is the image inside the ball.
Would you say that fits in with most of the ones we saw earlier, like the 6?
I would say that fits in with most of the photographs that you saw earlier, yeah. However, the balancing act is that at the reason why this is not f2.8 or any lower or any higher, as it were, is because once you start going to the really extreme large apertures, the focus inside the ball really begins to become more and more of a problem. That line of focus in the ball, is extremely narrow. So obviously everybody's familiar probably with depth of field, that at the larger apertures, the depth of field is much more shallow, and at the smaller apertures, the depth of field is proportionally larger and more of the image is in focus. Now, with a Lensball, the depth of field proportionally within the Lensball itself is extremely narrow. So if you try using a large aperture, it amplifies this effect. So you need to, first of all, you need to make sure you've got a really sharp focus in the ball. And then you need to probably use an aperture which is somewhat forgiving of this narrow depth of field you have within the ball, so that you can ensure that the image in the ball is sharp. That's important. And then beyond that, you want to have an aperture which is large enough to blur that background. So it's this balancing act that you're playing with here. I find f3.2 or even maybe f4 is around the right mark to go with here. Now, shutter speed. Okay, so that would obviously depend a lot on the scenario that you're photographing in. If it's a bright sunny day, that might be faster. If it's coming into blue hour, you might use a slower shutter speed. It's all related. Is that
more of a
really
minimum that you want then, because you want to make sure
right
that
number
that
you want to have.
Camera shake, that type of thing.
Yeah, so 1/200th is about maybe I mean, obviously there's this rule that I came across some years ago that your focal length of your lens is related to the slowest shutter speed that you can use without getting any camera shake. So with a 100mm lens, in theory, you should be able to go down to 1/100th of a second without getting any camera shake if you're steady with your camera. Any lower than that, and you're risking some blurred out kind of image. So yeah, obviously you don't want to
and
go
then it would also
too low
depend
with
on
your
if you have
shutter
a person
unless you're
holding the
using a
ball, they
tripod.
can only hold it so still, right?
Yeah, if you're lucky enough to have somebody who's going to hold the ball for you, be very thankful
And it
to
might
them.
get hot.
Buy them cake, get them some tea and coffee. That ball is heavy, man. And it might get hot, yeah. Okay, so obviously, again, the exposure value, that will depend on your situation. In a regular photograph during the day where there's good lighting, you obviously want to have a nice, even, balanced exposure, but there might be a time when you want to photograph into a sunset, have a silhouette in the ball, for example, and then you might choose to stop down to a lower exposure value. It will depend on your situation. The ISO, once again, that is 100. If it's during the day, it's a nice sunny day. If you're shooting into the evening and your shutter speed is already getting down towards the kind of point that it might cause camera shake, obviously increase your ISO to compensate
There
for
was a
that, so
question
that you can
about
still
what was
achieve the
zero
aperture that you want to
EV.
achieve
For those of you that
your
are not
photograph.
familiar with that term, that's the exposure value or exposure compensation. So it just means zero exposure compensation. So when you're shooting an aperture priority, make sure that's set to 0, not plus or minus. That's all that means.
Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so we talked about camera settings. Now we're going to talk about what's actually going on inside your ball and why that's important to the photograph that you intend to take. So the effect that's going on inside the ball is refraction. Don't confuse this with reflection. Reflection is something different. Reflection is what happens, obviously, when you look in a mirror. The incident light comes in and then you get a reflected light coming back. Refraction happens when light passes through an object. It doesn't reflect, it passes through the object, and as it's passing through the object, it becomes distorted and bent. So you can see this classic photograph you probably remember from your time back in school when you were in a science class. You have a pen, and the area outside of the water, the air portion, the light passes through differently to the area which is filled with water, which is of denser mass, and that produces this distortion where the pen appears to be thicker because the light's become bent. So obviously this doesn't produce the kind of image you see in a Lensball, but Lensball nevertheless produces refraction, and when it's a spherical object, that light passes through the object and becomes bent as it passes through and produces an inverted image inside the ball. So some of you who haven't used one of these things, maybe they're not familiar with this. So I've got a glass ball here, and you can see this is the classic size of Lensball. And you can see I'm obviously, the right way up. If I just position the ball in front of my face, you can see I'm now upside down inside the image. That's the effect of refraction, and it's an important thing that you really need to think about throughout taking any kind of Lensball photograph. So as you just saw there, the light inverts inside the ball. Okay, so I've talked for quite a long time now.
Off your camera and you take both caps off and you look through it, it'll be upside down as well. It's the same principle. So just a reminder, guys, if you have any questions, please put them below. We're already gathering 36 some questions, Simon, so we're going to be here for a while. I think some of them are comments, so I'll go through those when we get there. Right? But if you have a question that is related to the material, please put that in the question area below.
Okay, so
keep going.
Darling, we want to carry on now, or we want to pitch some of those questions? Okay, so let's carry on. Okay, so here again are those 6 photographs that you saw earlier. I think we were beginning to see some of the results from that poll. Darlene, do you have the final tally for us so we can see which photograph people like the most?
Looks like, yep, number 2. 37%.
Number 2. Okay, great choice, guys.
Number 5, and then number 3
what was the
right
second
after
place?
it.
The Taj Mahal. Number 5.
And number 5 was
number 3
24%.
is this one here.
Number 3 was 17%.
Okay, excellent. Okay, thank you, everybody. That's always interesting to see what kind of photograph people like. Okay. So now you know about some of the camera settings and what refraction is. I want to talk about how you're going to apply this effect to your photograph. So as you saw, one of the key and one of the most interesting effects that occurs inside the Lensball is you have this upside down image. Now, the key to a successful Lensball photograph is how you deal with this. So let's talk about strategies to deal with the upside down image. Right, so the first photograph that you see here, it features 3 crystal balls, and they're placed in a puddle. Now, I spoke a little bit earlier about reflection being different to refraction. This photograph is one of those photographs that actually features both reflection and refraction in the same photograph, and it's being used for effect. So you can see a kind of an urban downtown area, neon lights inside the ball, and you can see that there's this middle part of the ball that has the reflection in it, and you can't really tell which is upside down and which is the right way up. So in fact, this area here at the top of the ball is upside down. It's a reflection, but it appears to be the right way up inside the lens ball. So this is how I've combined the effect of reflection and refraction to kind of trick the eye to make a photograph that works without having to invert the image.
I'd like to make note too, like to me, it looks like you're using a really long lens here in that big aperture, and that's how you're getting that nice sort of bokeh and those globs of the light blobs in the background, guys.
That's correct. I was using a longer distance focal lens. I was deliberately going for this bokeh background because I like the way those lights kind of crown the middle image here, and I think that's
it's really cool. Abstract, yeah. I think abstract photography is a lot of fun to play with.
Okay, so let's move on to the next image. So to emphasize, using reflection in combination with refraction is a great way to mitigate that upside down image. Okay, so the next slide, it features a photograph from Manarola in Italy, the famous Cinque Terre coastline. In this image, you can see the image inside the ball is the correct way up. But actually, the photograph has been turned upside down in post-processing. That's obviously physics would not allow the ball to kind of float onto a rock in this way. It's actually sitting on the rock. The background, though, is blurred out. So in this case, the strategy is to flip the image in post-processing so that the main focus, the subject, is the correct way up, and the background has been blurred out so that it doesn't become a distracting element in the photograph.
Ron wanted to know if this was a composite image, and I believe it's not, Ron. And like, it's literally just shot the other way around, because you can see the rock that's up top was under the ball when he shot it. So the whole thing is just rotated 180 degrees.
That's exactly right, yep. Darlene. So there's no composite image going on here. There are images where I might play around with this kind of post-processing, but in this case, keep it simple. Blur the background, turn the image upside down in post-processing, and you can get this result pretty much all in camera. No post-processing at all. Okay, so
that's my cue. Okay.
Your cue, yes.
All right, so we're going to show you a little video of how Simon rotates. Let me just get that up on the screen here. Okay, I think not sure what's happening. Of course, it's not going to work now. Okay, share my screen. Here we go. I does not want to share my screen. Sorry, guys. We just tested this, and I cannot get the video to play. So,
okay, at worst, I could talk about this.
Yeah, just keep talking. I'm going to refresh my page and ignore me for 2 minutes. This technical.
So, we have a technical issue, unfortunately, but The final solution for the upside down image, sorry, that turn of page is, what should I say? Another solution to use for the image being upside down is to use post-processing. Obviously, the other techniques used in camera ideas like reflection and just turning the image upside down later on after the photograph is taken. But you could also just, in the wonderful world of post-processing, pre-select the ball, and are we getting to it? My darling's changing the page. Pre-select the image in the ball, and then simply rotate only the ball and keep the background.
Okay, here we go. Here we go.
Here we go.
All right. Sorry, guys, I had to reboot myself. Ready and.
Okay, so it should be easier for me to explain now. You can see this. I think I was tripping over my words a little bit. I apologize for that. So obviously, I pre-selected the ball already. The background will stay static, and I will transform the image only in the ball and rotate it 180 degrees. And you're going to see that result in a minute as this slide presentation continues.
There we go.
And there you go. The ball is now in the same orientation as the background. So that's one other way that you can handle the upside down image. Just use post-processing and change it later on after the photograph is taken. Okay, so back to the slides. So do I need to select something here, darling?
No, you should just be able to keep going with the slides.
Okay, okay. We have a slight technical issue. Sorry again, guys.
Okay, how about now?
I can see myself enlarged, but I can only see. Okay, now we're back on.
Got it? Okay.
Got it. Got it. So now I can move the slides. Okay, so we talked about the image inside the ball and how you deal with that being upside down. The next really important aspect is to control the background. So what's in the ball is the main subject, which obviously everybody knows in photography. If you're photographing a model, for instance, for portrait photography, that's important. But equally important is controlling the background so that you don't have any distracting elements coming in that will be jarring and unbalance your image. Right, so the first thing that you can do, we talked a little bit about wide angle photographs already. In this case, you want to include the background. You think that it complements the image inside the ball somehow, and you just decide to run with that. Pardon me. And here we have an example with a nice sunset sky background, kind of this glowing area with the sky. And you have this sort of play on this area that glows here with the image down here. And it's a nice sort of dynamic, in my opinion. So I want to talk about the settings for that particular photograph. So we talked about the base settings. Here's an example now of how that can be radically different depending on the location that you're photographing in and the story you want to tell with that particular photograph. So this time we're not using a longer distance lens at all. It's the opposite. We're using a 17 to 40 millimeter wide angle lens on a Canon camera. And this particular photograph was set to 20 millimeter focal distance. Again, I used autofocus and spot focus to focus on the image within the ball. The shoot mode was aperture priority. We talked a little bit about why you use that as opposed to other camera settings, because the aperture is the important setting here. The aperture was f4.5, Obviously, that 17 to 40 millimeter lens has a maximum aperture of f4, so it's impossible to get down to anything larger than that. And a shutter speed of 1/60th to keep the shutter speed fast enough to prevent any kind of camera shake. An ISO 500 is used here so that I can maintain that dynamic of the fast-ish shutter speed with the aperture I've used. And I've underexposed this photograph. The reason it's underexposed is because I wanted to expose for the sky to be the correct exposure. The foreground is obviously rather dark here. Some people might suggest using some form of digital blending, HDR type photography. I guess that's again an aesthetic thing, whether you want to include more detail in the foreground or not, or whether you are happy for that to be somewhat silhouetted. Okay, the next kind of strategy, so just to recap, this is wide angle. In this case, I wanted to include that background because I like that interesting sky.
In that picture, somebody wants to know the distance to the ball in the last one at the sunset.
This photograph.
Mm-hmm. We're guessing now, right?
This photograph is taken in Sri Lanka, and
a meter or closer.
I feel like it's probably about 30 or 40 centimeters, a guess. Okay. It's pretty wide angle, so you would have had to have been fairly close to it. But there's also quite a large area of foreground, so I'm going to guess about 30 or 40 centimeters away from it.
Cool.
Okay, so telephoto, a macro. So in this case, this is the kind of classic composition that I like to use a lot for my photographs. You've got a dominant main subject in the ball. This is Nagoya Castle in Japan, and that background has been blurred. You can see this kind of green bokeh. It's caused by light reflecting off the trees in the middle of the frame, just below the castle. That's the area that's being focused on, and that light is what's produced that nice green bokeh.
Oh, okay. Lots of Japanese castles,
it's in
temples.
Nagoya. Yeah, Osaka's a beautiful castle as well, which I also enjoyed photographing. But no, this one's in Nagoya. Nagoya is a very underrated Japanese city if you ever have a chance to go. And their udon soup is amazing. Anyway, let's carry on. So in this case, to take this photograph, I used a long telephoto lens, a 70 to 300, and at those longer focal distances, you're getting some macro-like effect. So what happens here is you get an effect called compression, and it's compressing the background, but the image inside the ball has a fisheye-like effect. So you've got this opposite here. Which is a nice aspect of Lensball photography, that you can zoom in very far and compress the scene, and yet also get an awful lot of information inside the ball from the fisheye-like focal distance that you effectively get from Lensballs. So I used 210 millimeters here. The focus, again, spot focus. Again, shooting priority is aperture priority. This aperture of f5.6 is the largest available aperture at that focal distance on this particular lens. So that's the reason for this. Otherwise, I might have chosen a larger aperture, but I'm happy with the bokeh that produced, so that worked very nicely. Shutter speed is relatively high because when you're using long distance telephoto lenses, there's a higher chance of camera shake. So
sorry, Simon, can I just
use
interrupt for a
fast
second
shutter
here?
speed.
We're on slide
And that
30
is
and
what-
we're already at 49 minutes. So
Yeah,
we want to keep moving maybe a little bit faster. I don't want to keep everybody. If you guys want to stick around, we may run over an hour, obviously, but you're going to get lots of great information. So apologize for going long, but we like to give you lots of value. So keep going, just giving you an idea of the time.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Darlene. Okay, so this effect, which is known as bokeh, some of you, I would probably expect most of you are already familiar with this effect. It's produced when you have usually a large aperture in combination with a long telephoto lens, and there's also a separation between the main subject, the object you're focusing on, and the background being some distance away from that. You will produce a blurred out background if you have that combination of effects with your camera lens and your aperture. When you're photographing at nighttime, or sometimes when you have reflected light coming off something like leaves or light reflecting off the water, then you get these nice,
like the one you had with the
like
reflections
balls in the background that are attractive.
I teach exactly the same
yeah.
thing in my portrait class, because it's the same principle, guys.
So that's what
right. You want to be the subject to be far away from the background. Use a longer lens and a wide aperture, and then you're going to get that beautiful bokeh.
Okay. Perfect. So again, this is one of these sort of crossover effects that works both for Lensball photography and other forms of photography like portrait work. So here's an example of that effect in Lensball photos. So you've got this Ferris wheel here that has this nice light. It's coming to blue hour. A large aperture is being used in combination with this photograph, and you've got the shapes of the bokeh light in the background that nicely sort of frame the bottom of the ball and complement the rest of this image. So I particularly like using bokeh with Lensball photographs because the ball itself is circular, and then that light in the background, those bokeh balls are also circular, so it plays off quite nicely against each other.
Beautiful.
Thank you very much. I also, when I've done other webinars before, people have commented particularly on that photograph. So thanks, I appreciate that. What works best for Lensball photography and why? So we talked about the upside down image. We talked about the background. Now I want to talk about the subject in relation to how close you are to it. And why that's important for Lensball photographs. So there are some photographs that don't work well as a wide angle photograph, and you need to have a telephoto lens to zoom into them for them to be an effective composition. And there are some photographs that need that wide angle in order to be able to properly frame the image. Now, the general rule is, if you need to zoom in to your main subject with a regular lens, if it wasn't a Lensball photograph, you were just taking a regular photograph with your camera, and you had to zoom into the main subject for it to be close enough in your frame for it to be a good main subject, then you are not close enough to the main subject for that to be a Lensball photograph. So here we've got on the left-hand side, a photograph taken at 50mm, which isn't that long in terms of focal distance, but it's already long enough to mean that inside the ball here, which is relatively small, the main subject is minuscule. It's far too small for it to be a nice image. Now, if we compare this to another landscape on the left, in order to be able to capture this entire scene, a wide angle lens is required. So 17 millimeters is obviously already very wide on a full frame camera. And that's required to capture this type of landscape. So because I know that at this focal distance it requires a wide angle, I also know that it will capture inside a lens ball, and that scene will fill the lens ball so that it actually forms a nice photograph. It's not minuscule in this image anymore. You can really see this background landscape at this distance. So the rule is you must get close enough to your main subject for it to fill the inside of your lens ball. If it's not filling the inside of the lens ball, get closer. Okay, so let's also, Darlene, the next video, please.
I'm on it. Here we go. Cross your fingers, everybody. And is it coming? It says that it is, but I don't see it there. So, oh, there we go. Okay. Hang on. I got the wrong one. Big. Ready? Okay. Here it goes.
Okay, so another aspect of the main subject is making sure it's properly lit. You need to have the image now that you can see the images, the light is in front of the camera. So you're getting poor quality light inside the ball. As we come around and the light is coming from behind you and lighting up your main subject, now the image inside the ball is much clearer. You're getting less reflections on the surface of the ball because light is coming through the ball, and that's the main sort of effect. So you really want to have the main subject well lit and light from the main subject to be lighting through the ball to be able to make sure that that's the important focus of your image.
Yay, it worked. Okay, we're back. Can you see the slide again?
Yeah, no, I can't move the slide on its, there we go.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, darling.
Technical stuff.
Okay, so here we got that image that you just saw from the video. This is a still photograph of that same scene. The bridge is well lit and the pagoda behind it. And this forms a nice subject. There's a little bit of reflection on the bottom of the ball that you can see, but it's not a distracting element because the light coming through the ball is so strong that it counteracts that.
Would you say in a simpler form that the ball is in the shade and the subject is in the light?
Yeah, that would that's an ideal combination. You're not always going to be able to achieve that. There will be a lot of occasions where the ball sits in the light and you're taking a photograph with the subject in the light. That's okay. What you want to avoid is the ball being in the sunlight, but the main subject's being in the shade. That's definitely not good. And here you see an example of the light. The composition is relatively okay, but because the main subject, this cliff Durdle door in the UK, is not well lit. Obviously, the light is shining on here, but the light is behind the cliff. It's early in the morning, and because the light's not coming through the ball, and you can see much more of the reflection at the bottom of the ball, and it's more distracting than it would be if the light was shining onto the cliff and lighting up your scene. Okay, where to place the ball. So we talked about, I think this is the final part that I want to talk about now. So where to place the ball is important. It needs to be somewhere that obviously is close enough to your subject where you are able to control the background and so on. But it's not always necessarily easy to find somewhere that you can actually place the ball, that it won't move around, that will also allow you to get a nice composition. So here are a few ideas that might help. I've got 6 photographs here, and each of them show some different strategies for ball placement. On the top left, there is a link chain, and the ball happened to sit nicely in the middle of one of those, and would sit
What
still.
city is that?
That's
Cool.
Boston. So that uses sort of more man-made structures to complement your image. You can use natural structures like the divot between the main tree trunk and a tree branch in this case, and it complements the image in the background. Pardon me. So you've got this cherry blossom tree in the background being held inside another tree itself. So again, you've got this complementary thing here. You've got the man-made structures with the cityscape, and you've got the more natural world with the tree in the background.
There's lots of questions about sizes of balls in the chat, Simon. So there's one where the person is holding it. Is that one of the smaller size ones?
Yeah. Okay, so we'll just break to talk about the size of the ball. Okay, I've got 3 balls here. Here's the smaller one, and that would be that size of ball that you can see being held. Here is the larger of the 2 Lensball sizes that are being sold. So this, sometimes it's called the Lensball Mini, and this one's called the Lensball sort of regular, as it were. And here is the larger of the balls. So if I can just... Okay, so you can see the 3 sizes here. Now, 5 of those photographs are taken with this ball. One of those photographs is taken with this ball, and I think that photograph on the top right, where there are 2 balls, is probably these 2 balls in combination.
So what are the millimeter sizes on those? I know the medium one is the 80, as the small one is 60, and then 100 or 110. Okay, so yeah, 60, correct. 80, and 100. There's also a comment about dollar stores and things. There is a difference in glass quality. Like, this is crystal quality, so it's going to be perfectly clear without flaws or bubbles. If you go to the dollar store, you will be able to get a glass sphere, but it's probably going to be more plastic, and you'll get flaws in the middle, which will show up in your pictures. So guys, there's lots of questions about this. Darling. The article that I just linked to in the chat explains all of that and which one to buy for your best use. So check the article. Rob just put it in the chat again. Just copy and paste that, and you can check that out later. We've created a list of shopping. I created some different ones, different versions, not just Lensball, but some lower quality ones. I'm actually going to buy a set that's a $30 set that has all 3 and see if I can compare the quality. They both say that they're the K9. So just be aware of like reviews and things before you purchase them.
Okay, so perfect. So we talked a little bit about the ball size. Obviously, the one on the right has 2 balls in it. In this case, I'm showing this slide because you've got the flat wall, but it's got these small mini tiles, and in the middle of the small mini tiles is a small divot. That is often good enough to hold the ball without it moving. And I was able to place this ball quite close to the edge of a wall here, and then you've got this temple structure in the background. If you're unable to find a natural place where the ball sits on its own, then holding the ball is a great way of approaching this. If you hold the ball, then you can basically compose it any way you like. And this photograph was taken in Washington, and in the background you can see the Lincoln Memorial. Another nice location and option to place the ball is a reflective surface. So in this case, you've got a marble reflective surface that the ball is sat on, and this effect that you can see in the background is some light painting. Cool. Finally, the photograph you saw earlier, Cinque Terre, again, a natural location, this rocky outcrop formation I found perfectly held the ball in place so that I was able to move away from the ball and then compose my
We actually had a
photograph.
lady on one of my workshops. She's a good friend of ours. She actually had somebody make a holder for her. He was like a blacksmith. So it's a stick that's got like a pokey end. So pokes it into the ground, and it was, I don't know, a foot high or something. And it had a little circular bit on top that she would then put the top of a pop bottle. So she cut the top of the pop bottle off, put it in inverted so the ball would sit there, and then she did her shots that way. It was ingenious.
Yeah, it's there's any number of strategies in terms of how you're able to get the ball to hold in position. One thing which I'd like to talk about, as Darley mentions there, this strategy where you've got something, a bespoke design, that's great. What I think you need to be very careful of with some of these things is, does it look natural in context with the rest of the scene? So you can in fact buy Lensball holders from some of these companies that sound very similar to that which will screw on, for example, to the top of your tripod. However, I personally, I'm not a fan of that, because especially if you compose and that Lensball holder and the top of your tripod can be seen in the same photograph, I think aesthetically that doesn't look very pleasing in most cases. It's much better if you can find a location that you can place the ball that actually complements the scene that you're photographing in. If you do happen to use one of these Lensball holders or a cap, my suggestion is you basically crop the bottom of the photograph away so that you can't see that lens cap. If you do choose to buy my course on Lensball photography, I've got a novel approach to using some of these tripod Lensball holders that you could use, and use some post-processing to deal with
Simon, we have to keep
that
going
bottom
because
portion of the image. But
we're
let's
past
carry on.
an
Yeah,
hour,
let's carry
and
on.
people
Okay.
may actually have to leave, and I want to make sure that they get to the end. And we've
Yeah.
got 50 questions to answer, so let's kind of move through this part.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so another strategy to prevent the ball from moving around is to find an object that you can place behind the ball. That might be a key, it might be some pebbles. You might use a key ring to place under the ball. Depends what you've got on your person to be able to hold the ball in place. But be careful, the balls are quite heavy, and even if you think that you've got the ball steady without moving, you need to be a little bit careful that it doesn't just sort of gravity takes hold and it moves the ball once you're away from the camera. It could potentially cause some damage if it drops.
And run down the street.
Yeah.
There it goes.
Ground level, I generally don't like to take photographs at ground level, because if you do this, you find that half of the ball is taken up by an uninteresting subject at the bottom of the ball, this sort of tarmac or uninteresting surface that the ball is sat on here takes up half of the image already. This was just a test photograph, by the way, as an example to show why it's not really the best location to photograph from the ground. However, there are always exceptions. This photograph is taken from the ground, and I like that sort of cherry blossom petal blade that the ball is sat on. And that provides an interesting subject for the foreground. Equally, if the ball is sat in a puddle or something like that, that reflection will also work. Okay, so in this instance, you've got two balls. Yeah, they appear to be sat on the ground, but actually they're sat on the edge of a seawall, and directly behind them is a drop. So they are in effect elevated above their subject, which is this coastline area, again in Cinque Terre in Italy. Okay, so thank you for listening to my slightly long webinar presentation. We would like to just take a little bit more of your time now and talk about a product which I have, which I hope will help you with your Lensball photography.
Just to remind you guys, we are going to answer as many of the questions as we can. We only have till the top of the hour, and then the webinar stops recording. So we're going to get through as many as we can. There's about 50, and I know there's some that are duplicates, so I'll try and put those together. So if you could just hang on for about 2 minutes. Simon has a fantastic Lensball course, and I don't know anybody else that has such a thing. So if you want to learn a lot of the advanced techniques, people were asking about floating balls and things like that. Just hang on for 2 minutes. Listen about his course, and then we're going to get to the Q&A. So hang tight.
Okay, so let's do this, darling. Let's talk about this course. Thanks for the introduction. And yeah, this is the first Lensball photography course out on the web, and I basically have been learning about this subject for many years now, and I put this information all into this course, and it's called Globalize. So one thing which you will have noticed during the course of this presentation, there were no photographs with portraits that featured the Lensball, but that's not a reason that you can certainly take Lensball photograph portraits, but there are some technical aspects which I run through during the course that you need to be aware of if you want to be successful at this.
Right. So we didn't cover this topic today, guys, because this is a beginner Lensball photography webinar, and this is an advanced technique. So that's something to practice and learn once you've got a bit of time under your belt.
Yeah, exactly. So I didn't start taking photographs of portraits with the Lensball when I first started to do this myself. It was something I probably took half the year before I started getting into taking Lensball photographs with portraits. I sort of worked out the technical issues and started to become more successful at this. I think you can look at using the Lensball to do various things, though. So some people had already talked about the floating ball. In this case, you're going to learn, if you buy the course, how you can place the ball exactly where you want it in your scene. So obviously one approach is to try and toss the ball in the air and catch it mid-air. Well, good luck with that. I tried that many times, and while I have a mildly successful result from it, there are any number of problems. You could drop the ball, you could hurt your foot, you have a problem with the shallow depth of field focus, so it's really difficult to achieve sharp focus if you try to toss the ball in the air and do it that way. The approach which I've now refined that I show in my course allows you to place the ball exactly where it needs to be. So you can see the middle photograph, the ball intersects the horizon. The ball on the right sits framed by the arch doorway frame in Santorini in Greece. So the ball is exactly where it needs to be in the frame. That's something which I cover in detail in my course, and I hope that will be useful for you to learn.
Yep, how to shoot it and how to put it together. I've explained for a couple of people in the chat that it's actually a multi-image process, right? So he explains that in more detail.
Yeah, exactly. This is a multi-image process, and there is a post-processing element at the end of that, and you need some specific photographs in order to be successful at the post-processing element. And I run through all of that in the video. Okay, there's also a lot more creativity to this. I think.
What was the one you shared me on this? It was here, sight, all your senses, right? Sight, sound, smell, touch.
Yeah. There's exactly. I think Lensball photography is great if you can turn this into a theme, a style of photographs. A series, and I'm always looking in any kind of photography, whether that's Lensball, light painting, landscape, how can I introduce variety into that series of photographs? So with Lensball photography, it's interesting because you have a defined parameter, the Lensball, and that can't change, but you have to create variety in your photograph, yet still always have the Lensball. So I'm going to talk about in the video how you can use different handheld positions to introduce variety.
Sorry, just to be clear, guys, he means inside of his video course.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, inside the course. You can do still life photographs. There's light painting on the bottom right-hand side. You can see the middle top and the top right. They feature still life photographs taken indoors. So obviously, you know, right now some people are stuck indoors a little bit because of issues around the world. I cover still life photography quite a lot, and you can take photographs with color balls or multiple balls. Okay, now I have a special offer for everybody.
If you don't mind, I would like to tell them about this, you guys, because
go ahead, darling.
If you've been on lots of my webinars over the last few weeks, I have a special guest who brings a unique idea or theme, and you get lots of information as we've done in the last hour. And if you want to continue your learning with that guest speaker, like Simon here, this is, like I said, the most unique topic, and so many people signed up for this. I didn't have any idea it was so popular, but he's generously given us 50%, roughly 50% off his course just for you guys till Monday. Okay, so it's 2 hours of video, roughly. You've got 6 sections, and it's designed for people that are just starting with this kind of photography, and all you need is the lens ball on your camera. So it's regular $89.99. These are priced in US dollars. Okay, Simon is in Korea, I'm in Canada, but international purchasing and transactions are generally in US currency. Okay, so Rob has posted the link for you a couple of times in the chat, and it's also the button to get to it from the offer down below as well, where you found the question and the poll. So let's do that. Next one. I don't want to spend too much time on this, guys, but just let you know that, again, it's pre-recorded, so the videos are watchable anytime. You could start today, tomorrow, the next day, but you download the videos and you keep it forever. You don't have to pay anything else. Okay, so if you choose to join this course, then you'll be in good company. I've got plenty of people who have already bought this and have had great results from doing so. Here's one example of one of the reviews, and you can see another portrait photograph taken. Great example. Yeah. So I'm also giving away some extra bonuses that don't normally come when you buy the Lensball video course from my website. So let's talk about those 3 bonuses. So you're going to get with it 2 extra PDFs, one that covers landscape Lensball photography ideas, and the other that covers a lot of the same ground that I've just talked about in this presentation. Perfect. So this is perfect for you to recap everything that was in this webinar today. Perfect. And if you're really interested in learning from me further, and you want to buy the course in the next hour or so after the webinar is finished, you can take advantage of this fast action bonus. And I hope that you'll learn a lot from the course. Obviously, afterwards, you might have some questions about specific areas of Lensball photography which you'd like to have covered, or perhaps for me to look at some of the results of your photographs, for them to be reviewed and to have some feedback. I can offer that in a 1-hour group coaching call. So I would like to just say, guys, that is very unusual. Very few instructors that have video courses offer this type of one-on-one coaching. So this is a great way to actually ask more questions and have more of Simon's time. So just so you're clear on what is included with the course, normally if you go to his website, you can buy it for $89.99. if you buy it using our link before Monday, Rob is putting it in the chat, and it's in the offers section down below the video. Just scroll up a little. You will get it for $47. You'll get the 2 free PDF bonuses. Those will become with your download when you get the videos, and Simon will get in touch with you if you buy this in the next hour. So it's now 8:30-ish my time. So by the time we finish, we'll give you an extra hour to make your decision. If you buy it within that hour, or if you're watching the replay, we'll give you a couple hours. If now for people that are not on this call live, we'll give you a couple hours to get that as well. He'll get in touch on how to set up the group call. And I believe we said you're going to do a couple of time zones, one for sort of Europe, one for Asia/Australia, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Awesome. Let's get to the Q&A. Do you want to advance the slides on?
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay. So if you choose to go ahead and buy the course, then obviously follow the link that has been introduced in the chat. You'll click the buy now option, and you'll come through to the eJunkie sales page. That's the vendor that I'm using for selling my my video course. Once you come to this page,
keep going. Let's keep going. Keep going. They know how to buy the stuff. Yeah.
Okay.
You guys can pay with your credit card. One thing I will mention again, if you're still not sure, if you get there and you read it and you're not sure if it's for you, whether it's too beginner or too advanced, whether it's not the right time for you or what have you, as long as you buy it now, you'll have access to the course to download it, and you have 30 days to make your assessment. If you decide it's not for you, just ask him for a refund, and he's happy to do that for you. So it's risk-free. So
exactly.
Whew.
So yeah, any problems, please contact me. I'll try to resolve them. And if you're not happy with that resolution, then obviously I'm quite happy to give a full refund for the course.
Awesome. Okay. Q&A. So people are asking a lot about where's the link. If you haven't already seen it, it's in the chat. Rob has posted a couple of times. You can use the link that's on the screen right now, or down below on the offers, there's a button to click. Okay, so we've got a lot of questions, and we have 40 minutes. So I'm going to try and keep you on task here to keep this brief. You get less than a minute for each question, Simon. So this is going to be
we're going to go through this like a whirlwind.
We're in the speed round. We're in the speed round here. Okay, so we want to try and answer as many of these as possible. Okay, so Veronica asked this way early on. What is the best lens to use with the ball when you sit? And what do you sit it on to get a complete circular effect? Because I think you covered a lot of that in terms of what to sit it on, but I'm not sure what she means by a circular effect. Do you know what she means by that?
Yeah, I think I understand exactly what you mean by that. Okay.
So she wants to know which lens to use.
Right. Again, as I think I covered, it depends on the situation. Some situations require a wider lens, and some require a longer distance telephoto lens. I would generally advise to begin with, especially to use a macro lens if you have it, or a kit lens if you don't, and get the longer focal distance lens. In terms of getting the full circular effect, find somewhere that doesn't have obstructing foreground elements in your frame, or try holding the ball, so, like this, then you get that full effect.
Perfect. All right, next one. Oops. Kelly wants to know. Okay, sorry, I'm not sure that's an actual question. She was just looking for ideas. So hopefully we answered your questions, Kelly. Want to see what others are doing and so on. Okay. Carol wants to know, where do you focus when using the Lensball? Now, I know you mentioned in the center of the ball or the image inside, and there were some questions about that. Do you want to get more specific?
So where do I focus inside the ball? Right.
I think what they mean, like the answer that I gave in the chat was like single point focus, right? If they're using like a multi or a zone focus, that's going to be difficult.
Yeah. Okay. So let's bring the ball up here. Okay. Where are we? Okay. So.
hard to see the camera.
Yeah. I mean, I can't see myself and do this, right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So What you need to do is use a spot focus. So you can have, what you want to do is focus right in the middle of the ball. If you try to use zonal focus, the camera will choose for you, and it might choose somewhere on the edge or even outside the ball, and then you will miss the focus. So it's important to use single spot focus that goes right in the middle of the ball. Anywhere else, if it's on the edge, then the focus will be different, and you could well end up with a blurred image inside the ball, which is not what you want.
Exactly. I'm going to find an article for you guys on focus modes, and I'll put that in the chat. Marilyn says, what are the best subjects to photograph with a Lensball? Or maybe just to shorten that, what are some of your favorite types of things to photograph with a Lensball?
Yeah, I enjoy photographing cityscapes with it. I enjoy photographing single trees. I think that works really nicely. I enjoy photographing scenes that have pardon me. I enjoy photographing scenes that have bokeh light in the background. So I think those are probably my favorite. It can also be nice to have a portrait photograph as well.
Cool.
Some kind of main subject.
Jay wants to know how to support the Lensball, but I think we've already covered that. A lot of these questions came in early on before we sort of got to these, so we may have already answered them.
Yeah.
Wally wants to know what's the best lens to use. I think I'm just going to answer that one because Simon covered wide, sort of medium and long. So there is no best lens. The best lens is the one that does the effect that you want, right?
That's correct, yeah.
All right. Karen wants to know how to get everything in focus. So I think maybe she means the ball and the image inside the ball, or you just don't worry about it is the answer.
No, that's exactly what she means. So if, we talked a little bit about keeping the ball sharp but the background blurred. However, you might have some situations where you actually want to have the image in the ball sharp, but also the background in focus as well. Now, that can be a little tricky to achieve because a lot of the time you've got this the ball and then a big separation to the background. However, if you use a small aperture, then you will have a much larger depth of field, and in that case you'll have the ball in focus and your background should be in focus or nearly in focus as well, enough for it to be sharp enough for your photograph. Perfect.
So David had basically a similar question about getting the edges sharp, so I'm marking that one as answered as well. There was some discussion about people having trouble getting shipping from the original Lensball company. That's not really something we can help you with, unfortunately.
Yeah,
have you heard about that?
Just to mention, I'm aware from talking to some of these guys, because obviously we have a bit of a small Lensball, crystal ball sort of, people tend to know each other in that circle. I know that some of the Lensball suppliers, they use a process called drop shipping. And it's a way for them to... for when you buy the product, they don't actually have a warehouse full of these things. You buy the product, and then they buy the product themselves from a Chinese supplier.
Oh,
so that's what's happening there. You end up with this delay as a result of that. I know some of the Lensball suppliers don't use drop shipping, and in that case, you'll get your ball faster.
Excellent. No, I think this one was already answered. I'm just going to put this into the answer for them here. What are the advantages of the different sizes? I think we covered that, and the article covers that as well. So I'm going to mark that one as answered. Again, same answer here. Again, questions about different sizes. So I'm answering that one. Okay, Mike wants to know, do you get lens flare with the ball? And so should you shade it from direct light? So that had to do with that the video that we showed with the lighting.
Lens flare.
Any suggestions there?
I mean, we're talking about
Generally, you want to avoid the light coming directly in. Like you don't want
yeah.
the sun to hit it because you're going to basically start a fire, number one, and it's just not going to be attractive, right?
I mean, if the light lens flare is going to happen when the light is in front of you and coming. I would say I've rarely noticed a problem with lens flare with Lensball photography because you're using in the most part a medium to long telephoto lens to make the ball dominant in your frame. So you're compressing the scene, so you're not actually getting that kind of sun coming in from the side of the image to produce that lens flare. So yeah, no, I've not really had a problem with that. But related to that, what you do have happen a lot of the time when the ball is sat in the sunshine, not in the shade, and the sun is behind you, so it's therefore lighting your subject, is you can end up with quite a strong sun reflection on the surface of the ball. And that can be a bit distracting, especially if it appears in the wrong area.
So
on
would
the
you just
surface
shade it like with your hand or with a little reflector or
yeah.
something?
I tend to and have done just place my hand over the area where the reflection is happening to stop that sun getting onto the surface of the ball, and yeah, then you can prevent that.
Cool. Or you could just carry like a small reflector with you in your bag or something.
Yeah, that
A question again. John wants to know, is there a difference in quality of the glass and who makes the best? I think there's two companies that you recommend, right? Like which two make the best?
There's can I put out the names of those companies? Do you
Mm-hmm.
mind, darling?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So there are two companies. One is called Lensball and the other is called Refractique. I just want to mention now then, from what I understand, Lensball uses the drop shipping and Refractique tries to avoid that. I think they do it a little bit, but for the most part, if you buy from them, you are likely to get your ball at a faster speed.
How do you spell it? It's Refractique, right? I'm just spelling it with a QU. Okay, got it.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, so if somebody was just wanting to know about where to buy it in Australia because they're not able to use those links, so I just put the name.
I would, if you are buying from Australia, I would buy Refractique because that guy is Australian who runs that company.
There you go. There you go. For Sue. Yep.
And what was I going to say? Yeah, the quality of the glass. From what I understand, it's K9 glass, and they both use the same suppliers, so it will be the same quality.
There you go. Michelle says, are there some situations that work best for Lensball? I think we kind of covered that already with the different subjects in the earlier questions. So I'll mark that.
We did, and yeah, so I think that there are some subjects which work better than others.
Don wants to know how to keep the hand or the support of the lens ball out of the photo. So I think you mentioned that already during the webinar. Like sometimes you might just crop it.
Yeah. Okay. So let's answer this question in three parts. Okay. How do you avoid the hand? Sometimes, to contradict the question, you want to include the hand because it's a nice element in the frame that complements the ball. Other times, you want to avoid having that in the frame, so you might not want to have the hand or the lens ball holder. One strategy is to just crop that out, and the other strategy is to use Photoshop to clone that out. I cover that a little bit more in depth in my course if you choose to buy that, how you might use strategies to clone out the obstructing elements.
Cool. Okay. Sylvia asked, what other than having somebody hold it, what is the best to support it? I think we definitely covered that, so I'm just going to mark that one. Sumaya says, will you be showing how to use it? I think that was earlier, so I think we've covered that. Stephen wants to know, would a macro lens work well for Lensball photography? Yes, he covered that earlier as well, Stephen. The macro works really well because you're able to get closer to the lens ball and focus closer. If you don't have a macro, try extension tubes. Okay. Oh, Marion says, how can I get a shot I want when hand holding the lens ball without burning my hand?
uh, yeah,
Carefully
that's a
is the
that's
answer.
carefully. That's a fun thing to do.
Yeah.
Basically, it's there will come a time where there's a photograph you want to take where the perfect angle means that you're going to have difficulty with this effect where the light kind of comes onto hand a little bit
Oh
like it's
yeah,
doing
look at
here.
that. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I've got a spotlight behind me, and that light is coming through and then onto my hand, so you can see this effect right now. It's about angling. So maybe you need to change the angle, just play around a little bit and try and find somewhere where it's not burning your hand off.
So you look like the magician, right?
Yeah, a little bit like a magician. So it's a little bit of trial. It's a little bit of trial and error. Or if you're brave and you're able to hold on to the ball long enough, and you can grit your teeth, then just sort of take focus quickly and just sort of take the pain, and take the photograph.
Or
How much do you want that photograph?
Get somebody else to hold it, and like you said, pay them lots of money.
You know what? I always remember this photograph I took in Mongolia, and I'd asked the driver over there. I don't know if any of you ever go to Mongolia. You can sign up for these tours that go through the Gobi Desert. They'll take you through there on these old Russian vans. And you'll have a driver and a Mongolian guide who will take you. And I remember taking a photograph there. It's a nice photograph. I kind of got this balance between somebody holding the top of the ball and somebody holding the bottom of the ball, and intersects the line of the Gobi Desert in the background. But I know for a fact that guy was holding the ball and the sun was shining on his hand like that. And he's a tough guy, man, because he was holding that ball without grimacing while I focused on the photograph, and it was not a quick process either.
He didn't want to admit that he's burning his hand.
He did not. Yeah, but it must have been burning his hand. But yeah, he did it. I was impressed.
Okay, Ron wanted to know, do they scratch easily? And I'm just going to answer that with one quick answer. Yes. So that's why Simon has the sock. I mean, just as your lens would of your camera, right? It's the same. You want to take care of it.
Yeah, it's exactly the same. So you need to take care of it. And it will scratch. That's why you want to protect it with a sock. Now, if it does scratch, it's not game over. You can deliberately place the scratched area of the ball at the bottom of the area that you're photographing. So, for example, if the scratch was here, then you place it at the bottom of the ball so that you can't actually see the scratch in your photograph. Or indeed, anywhere on the edge of the ball. It won't show up in your photograph if that scratch is there. So you can continue using the ball even with the scratch there in that case. But try to avoid it. Okay,
so there's a few questions about floating balls, so I'm just going to try and grab both of those because we've answered most of these. David and Kathy asked about the suspended or floated. As he's mentioned earlier, that's achieved with a multi-shooting process, which he does explain because it's a more advanced technique in his course. So basically, can you give him the 30-second rundown of how you do that, how you shoot it?
Okay.
It's a challenge for you. 30 seconds, go.
So 30 seconds. Okay, so this photograph is a multi-step photograph. You need to take 3 photographs. You need to have 2 tripods, one to hold the camera, one to hold the ball. You take the photograph with the ball on the camera, on the tripod. Then you take a photograph without the tripod there. And you take a photograph with you holding the ball just above the tripod. You then take those 3 photographs and you post-process them and
sorry, what was the third photo? Is the background only, right? So just
the third photograph is the background only, and you take those 3 photographs and you can use that in post-processing to use layer masking and cloning to remove the tripod from the bottom of the frame.
And just to be clear, the background shot is out of focus in both pictures, so you're still have it out of focus. So that's the short.
So I cover that more. I cover that in more depth in the video if you choose to get that in the course.
Here's an interesting question, and somebody suggested this in the chat earlier, and I saw this. Is it feasible to use an image on a computer, or I'm even thinking like a tablet or something, to provide the background? Interesting idea.
Yes, it is. You could use a background screensaver and use that as a background to the Lensball. That would
Or
work.
any of your own images. Just pick an image and away you go.
Indeed, and indeed, actually, you could use your tablet device or even your phone as a form of light if you chose to light paint behind the Lensball as well.
Cool. I'm not sure what this means. Could any Lensball lens be? I think any could any. So Sumaya, yes, any lens ball. It's basically just a crystal or a glass ball. It doesn't have to be those brands that we mentioned. If you go to the article, we've listed a few different ones that you can get that are less expensive as well.
Yeah, it's a good question and a good point. So Lensball is something that's become part of the photography vocabulary these days. But Lensball is simply a rebranding of Crystal Ball. If you buy a Lensball, you are essentially buying a crystal ball.
Yeah.
And I always called them crystal balls for a long time, although in an article I wrote for Digital Photography School, while Darlene was the editor there, I described the crystal ball as a kind of an external lens optic. And I kind of feel like that's the evolution of where we got to this product being called a Lensball.
Yeah, so they just copyrighted or trademarked the name.
Essentially,
okay,
yeah.
So we've answered this one. Katie wants to know about the particular sizes of balls. We've talked about that, but what is the purpose of the different sizes? We didn't talk about that. So when would you use a small one versus a large one?
Okay, so I generally, and most of the photographs I take are taken with this, the largest form, the 100mm size ball. That's because I find that the area of the ball that's in focus is larger in a larger ball, and you have a larger sweet spot. So the area on the edge of the ball tends to be distorted and out of focus. So the larger the ball is, the smaller that area as a proportion of the photograph gets distorted. So you get a much nicer, larger area
cleaner.
of the ball that's in focus, that's cleaner.
But the disadvantage is it's heavier to carry around.
Exactly. So the disadvantage is heavier. So if you're prepared to carry a heavy ball around, in essence, a bit like if you're prepared to carry a heavy lens around,
right,
then you will get better quality images. So if you're going to buy the larger ball, you're actually going to need to go to Amazon and buy it, because that is not available through one of the Lensball vendors.
Okay, cool.
The medium-sized ball, the 80mm ball, the largest of the Lensballs, that's actually quite a nice balance, though. You have something that's not too heavy to carry around, yet has a large enough size for it to have a clear image inside the ball without too much distortion.
So the small one is harder to work with, but easier to carry around. And as you go larger, it kind of reverses. Gotcha.
Exactly, gotcha. Yeah. Now, there are occasions where I will still want to use the smaller ball, though. You saw some photographs that had multiple images. I think it was a nice effect to have sort of small, medium, and large as a triplet set of images, to have that repetition, yet have variety in the repetition. So in that case, using different sizes worked quite nicely. Equally as well, there are occasions where I might find somewhere that will hold the ball in place for the background, but the gap is too small for the largest of the balls. I'm
going to hurry you along again, because we got 17 minutes and 28 questions left. So
okay, so you have if the gap is too small and you want, then using a smaller ball in that gap will take that photograph, whereas the larger ball would not fit. So in that case, that's when you might want a smaller ball and use that.
Pat has an interesting question. How does using the Lensball compare to ice? Like if you're shooting through ice, I would imagine that it's clearer, right? The ice is going to be sort of rippled and more distorted.
Yeah, the glass is far clearer.
So
I've taken photographs with ice before,
and it disappears. It starts to. It starts.
Obviously the ice melts, but it's definitely not as crisp.
Okay, cool. So it could make an abstract, but yeah, it's not gonna stick around if it's warm. I'm just gonna answer this one here. Does it work with a 50 mil prime lens? Yeah, it's gonna work with any lens. Quent wants to know, but if you have one that's gonna let you get closer, do that.
Just interesting point. That photograph with the Ferris wheel that you saw with the bucket light that people liked.
That was a 50.
That was taken.
Oh, there you go. Monique wants to know, how do you avoid seeing yourself in the ball? I would assume that you're not actually, it's not as reflective as like if you have like a ball bearing, right? So it's more you're seeing through it, you're not seeing the reflection.
Exactly, and especially if the light is strong coming through the ball, then you really hardly see that.
So not an
reflecting
issue.
On the surface.
Okay.
Yeah.
Linda wants to know, I was hoping to use the ball for insect macro photography, holding the ball in one hand and the camera in the other. It sounds like it might be difficult or impossible. I would say so. Would you agree?
Tricky.
It's hard enough to get bugs in with just the lens, but introducing another element.
The initial thought I have is that the main subject, which is the bug, is already quite small. So inside the ball, it's going to be even smaller. So I think it could be tricky to get something that would be interesting enough inside the ball for that to show. However, if you wanted to try it, I think that the techniques I use for the floating ball would apply here, where you would probably want to set up the ball on a tripod, the camera on a second tripod, so that you're not holding the ball,
doing all the things at once.
Doing all of the things at once. I think you need to have all of that on a tripod, and then get the ball as close in as possible to the insect as you can.
I was going to suggest before she goes to try it on an insect, pick something else that's tiny and see if you can make it work. Something that doesn't move or fly away. Right.
I mean, I think small objects can work as long as you can get the ball close enough into them. So, for example, that's that photograph I had with the earplugs in the few slides back. Maybe I can cycle back to that. So people can see this, I think. So you can see this photograph here. It shows these earplugs. These are obviously quite small, but I've got those earplugs close enough to the ball itself that they show up quite large inside the ball. So it's really about if you can get close enough to your main subject with the ball.
Right, exactly. Yeah, because they're like literally right behind the ball, aren't they? Like
yes,
millimeters.
They are.
Yeah. Danelle wants to know, in previous versions, like if you've done this webinar before, which of the images were most popular? The ones like they showed 1 to 6 before? Which were we on track with the same ones?
I don't think I did a poll before. So
sorry, we don't have that data.
It was obvious to do like a poll, but yeah, I mean, generally speaking, the photograph that was chosen has proven to be a popular choice.
No, stay on that one because we had a question about that one as well.
Okay.
Ron wanted to know something about did it have a dish of water? The one with the 3 balls. He says the one that was on the intro slide. I'm not sure which one he means. Intro photo. He says the one with the 3 balls, but it doesn't look like a water to me. A tray of water. Was a tray of water used? Sorry, I'm not sure which one you're talking about, Ron. Was the triple ball image done with water to reflect it? I think they mean the one where you had the bokeh in the background.
Yeah, that's exactly the one I'm thinking that they're talking about.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to...
It's forward, there it is. There we go, that one. So they wanted to know how you did the water. Was it just the puddle, or did you bring your own water?
It's a puddle.
Okay. So just
it was after some rain. It just happened to be there. I think I was walking to a friend's house in Busan in South Korea, and it had been raining, and I just saw this puddle under light, and just a spontaneous moment. I thought, okay, let's
Just
get
got
everything
lucky.
out.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Okay, now we really have to do speed round if we're going to try and cover off these. Stephen wants to know, you metered off the Lensball in the pic, or how are you metering, I guess is the question.
Yeah,
You're metering for the subject on the other side of the ball, right?
I would a meter for the subject on the other side of the ball. So the meter for the subject within the ball.
Gotcha. Okay, now I'm going to answer a couple of these because they're both about rotating. Diane wants to know, did you say rotate the camera to turn the image right side up to avoid post-processing? Like, so are you shooting with your camera upside down to avoid flipping it? I would say no, because that's going to be more awkward, Diane. You shoot straight side up, and then if you want the whole thing rotated, you just rotate the whole image. And then the second part to that question, Anne wanted to know, can you do the same thing in Lightroom that you demonstrated in Photoshop, rotating only the ball inside the image? No, you cannot. You need to have an image that has layers, such as Photoshop or GIMP or Affinity, or even you might be able to do it in Luminar. I haven't tried cutting that out yet. You could try it. You might be able to do it in there, but you need to have layers is the answer. On1 has layers as well. Kevin says, are there any tricks to get the horizon in the image aligned with the landscape horizon?
No, I don't think it's really a special trick. It's really just a case of just lining up the ball and the camera to be in line with that. I suppose if you use a tripod with your camera and the ball is steady in position, either on a wall, a branch, or maybe on a second tripod, it's easier to line up the two objects. So keeping everything static helps. But beyond that, I don't think it's a special trick. It's just a case of trial and error and just lining everything up.
Shaking it around, yeah. Diane says, are you lighting through the ball to the image? I think you covered that in the video, is basically the image, the scene behind the ball is what you want to light, not the ball. So we covered that.
Yeah, that's right.
Steven says, would it be good to use a neutral density filter if your subject is too bright? I would say that would be a good case anytime.
I would agree with that.
Yep, anytime. So yes, if you want to get that big wide open aperture and it's really bright, yes, by all means, use a neutral density filter. So then there's two questions from Rachel and Tiana about, do you have concern when using natural surfaces like the tree or the concrete, the rocks or so on that you put the ball on, about scratching it?
Yes. I think there's always that concern.
So just be super careful. Do you ever replace yours? Like, have they become so scratched that you replace them?
Yeah, I've gone through balls before. I will always take the chance to take a photograph on a surface that has a bit more risk, because I think sometimes in order to be able to get the photograph, you need to do that.
Right. And they're not super expensive. I mean, they're under $50. So if you end up scratching one, replace it eventually. Or if you've got one that's scratched up, save that one for putting on places that might be scratchy.
And as I say, if you do develop a scratch somewhere on the ball, then you can strategically place the ball in such a way that it doesn't show up in the photograph for quite some time before the ball ends up with so many scratches it becomes unusable.
Okay. Stephen has a question about spot metering for focusing. I'm not sure if Stephen's still here, but it says, would it be better to use spot metering for focusing inside the ball? And I think he means spot focusing. Yes. So you want to, we covered that, use a single dot focus, single point focus.
Yeah, I agree.
Trish wants to know, will you be doing this again? I'd love to tell my photography friends that they missed the opportunity. Well, actually, you don't have to tell them they missed it, Trish. They can actually still sign up for the webinar and watch the replay. I'll put the link in here in your comment for you. They can still sign up and go and watch the replay later. So you can gloat to them that you saw it live, but they can still watch it later. Please remember that the replay is only good available until Monday. Anne wants to know, are there any US or Canadian companies to order a Lensball from? Do you know any Canadian ones?
The two Lensball companies that are the major players. One of the guys is based in Australia, and the others are based in Europe. I am not aware of a specific company that's based out of America, but a lot of these companies tend to have websites that
tributary or something.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay, Rachel says, I want to buy the course, but I don't have a Lensball. Which one should I start with and where to purchase? Money is not the object. I prefer quality over price. So the article that we posted, Rachel, you can go here, and I'm sure that once you get inside of Simon's course, you're going to give some recommendations there as well, right?
Yeah, you can certainly, or you can message me for further recommendations.
Perfect. And Trish wants the link. There you go. That's the link. Okay. We've got 2 questions left. So 5 minutes. We can do it. We can do it. Is there you could fry your camera if light is coming from front? Yeah, I would say so. If the light's coming through the ball and hitting your camera, definitely you could burn your camera.
Yeah, you could do that, but you would be realistically, that's a situation which is not going to happen. You would have to be
aiming.
You'd be so close to the camera that it would be impossible for you to achieve focus. Your lens, obviously, most lenses have a minimum distance away from the main subject that they will focus at, and you will always be too far away from the ball to get the camera to focus. Yeah, no, it would never happen.
That makes sense. Judy wants to know, can you download the course to iPad? I'm assuming so. So what happens, Judy, is once you make your purchase, you'll get an email. I went through the process myself. Then you download all the video files. I believe it comes as a zipped file in a zipped folder. That's correct, yeah. So once you unzip it, you have to do that part on your computer, get the files, unzip it, have it on your computer, then you connect up your computer with your iPad and you can transfer them there or copy them there, right? So then you can watch on your iPad. Absolutely.
I'm not familiar with every single iPad. Obviously, newer versions and newer operating systems might be different, but I can say that I downloaded it onto my iPhone, which uses the same operating system as an iPad, and it was zipped and it unzipped it for me on my phone.
Awesome.
So I think that it should work.
Carol just said in the chat that she's had a Lensball in the closet for a while and never used it. And the webinar is what she's needed to get out there and do it. Excellent.
Excellent. That's what I want to
hear. So we've inspired her. Awesome. And the last question, and we've got 3 minutes left, so we're at the timer here. How far from the camera lens do you place the Lensball? I would imagine that varies depending on the lens and how close you can focus it, right?
Exactly, yeah. I mean, obviously, longer distance telephoto lens, you'll be further away. With a wide angle lens, you'll need to get closer. I've even photographed with a fisheye lens with the Lensball and had to get really close to it.
So I've got all kinds of other funky things too. I've got a lens baby. I could try that. I've got infrared. I could try that. So like Carol, I'm just going to mark that question as answered. Ellen says fun for kids too. Somebody says their grandson watched it and they want to try it now. So this is great stuff, you guys. Thanks for joining in.
Yeah, I'd say this is a great little project for some young adults, teenagers, or even a little bit younger. I mean,
with a little bit of safety instruction, right? So they don't burn.
With a little bit of safety instruction in terms of the ball being a little heavy and a drop hazard, and a little bit of safety instruction in terms of the fire hazard with the sunlight and potentially burning.
That's a great idea. I think I'm going to go try it with my niece because I've got Simon's course and I haven't used my ball either. So I admit to Carol's predicament. Mine has been in the closet or in the drawer over here in my photography room. So I'm going to go and try it. And I'm sure that I haven't seen my niece in a couple of months. She's 10, turning 10 this month, actually. So maybe I'll get out and try it with her. But if you guys are doing some fantastic Lensball photography, do please share it in the DPM Facebook group and on Simon's article. We'd love to see your images. Thanks again for joining. Maybe just go back to real quick to that end slide. So they've got the link on the end of the webinar there one last time. So if you have any questions about Simon's course, how can he reach you? How can they reach you, Simon? What's the best? way to reach you?
Okay, so if you have any questions about my course, then you can
Is there
visit
a
me on my you
contact
can
form?
visit me on my website, creativephotography.school.com, and you can visit the contact me section, and there's a contact form, and you could use that to contact me.
Or better yet, if you guys want to just easily just reply to the webinar email, send it to me and I'll fire it off to Simon. How's that?
That works too.
Perfect. Thanks for joining me, Simon. We are down to 45 seconds and our webinar is going to stop recording. So thanks for joining me. I know it's about lunchtime, your time, and it's dinner time here, well past dinner time. So thanks, everybody. Have a good evening or morning, wherever you are joining in from today. Take care.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. And I hope you enjoyed the webinar and found it the information useful.